team members. I just finished a project that had a bunch of different assets and versions, and I want to show how I managed to deal with some of the challenges that came along with dealing with all these different assets. Specifically, situations where you had a cue or a piece of music that was in one Logic session and wanted to pull it into another session, why you would need to do that, and there'll be a chapter mark where you can go straight and look at that technique. But first I want to kind of give an overview of the project and maybe give some context to what I was dealing with, and then also maybe walk through some of the sessions. And I also did the post mix, so I'll open up the Pro Tools session and show you how I organized everything in there. So there were 12 kind of archetypes, little commercials. They were only 15-second commercials. Each had a different piece of music, both in the front and then on the back end. And some of the 12 shared the same back end music as some of the others. So there were 5 different back end pieces. So there was kind of a matrix for these 12. And then from those 12 main versions, it got split out into 60 different iterations that we made 6-second versions, and then some of the pieces were a little more brand focused and some were more retail. So in the end there were 60 different commercials. And the trick was, because the music was so scored, it's kind of a 50s, 60s B-movie horror vibe. Everything was very scored, so for it really to work, we couldn't just do music edits and get away with doing all these versions that way. So I went in and kind of rearranged and tweaked the music at a more granular level to achieve all those mixes. So I'm going to just walk you through that, and then specifically, like I said, show you how to pull cues in from one session to another and how I was using folders. So let's do it. Let's start by looking at the spreadsheet that I had set up to keep track of everything. This doesn't quite represent all of what we ended up with, but it's the main version. The titles in pink were our archetype versions. So each one of these pink versions is a separate piece of music in the front, and then I have the back end music labeled here. So a lot of them share the same pieces. There might have been 5 or 6 different back-end versions, so it was just kind of a matrix of how we went along. And then I just used this to keep track of where we were in the process, and I would kind of color code as we went along, and I would make notes. And if I got feedback from the client, I would put it in here and then get rid of it once I addressed it. And then I would move on to this section to keep track of the post-mix side of things until everything was green, and that was a happy day. And then let's see what my folder organization looked like. And this is kind of how I kept track of my different sessions. So the tricky part of this is that if you're working on a film or TV show or something, you would typically create a template or use your master template to start with, and then as you worked on the thing and added sounds and added mixing qualities to your session, it would kind of evolve as you're going along. And this one, since it was a bunch of different pieces of music that were starkly different, and I didn't really know where we were going to end up, I just approached each of these demos or tracks I was doing in the beginning as a separate session. It was complicated a little bit by the fact that the front end and the back end were different, but that happens all the time, I guess. Once we settled, so there are 17 different sessions. Once we settled on the 12 that were our heroes that we're going to use, and the 5 back end versions, the problem I had was, because these are all very scored, I need to get down to the granular level to do all the different versions and move things around. How was I going to get the back end into the other front end sessions? So the way I did that was, this is This is one of the sessions here. It's kind of a pared down template because I think on this one, for instance, I ended up not using any strings, so I took the strings out.
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Oh, hi Siri. I got rid of that folder, but I have the woodwinds. There were no brass either. So this one was pretty pared down actually. But so what I did to pull in, I'll give you an example. So this is a 15-second version. And by the way, it's frustrating that in Logic you can only have one video in at a time. And the way I deal with that is I keep the audio that I've imported with the video, I keep it in there, and if you unlock it, so this is locked, and then this is unlocked, and if you unlock it and you import a new video to work on, say, a shorter version or different version or something, further on down, it'll import the new audio as well and keep the old audio where it was, and you can use that as a marker for when you re-import the previous video to work on that again. So it's a little kludgy, but that's the way I do it with Logic when I'm working with different videos in one session. And that's why a lot of guys, and if I was really thinking about this from the start, I probably would have used Pro Tools to drive the video, as you'll see in a second, but it worked fine for these. So some of the sessions had maybe up to 5 different versions in them. This one only has 4. But you can see here, so this material is the front end of this particular commercial. So just a quick little sting. They're not long pieces of music. So to pull that in, you can see here that this is all the component pieces of that back-end music. And I had treated that music, aged it just a little bit with Sketch Cassette. And I had treated the instrument, so for instance, say if there were a brass in the front end of the cue I'm working on, and then I'm going to go to this back-end music and there's brass, I had likely treated these differently because I was kind of going for a pseudo-aged sound. So here's an example. Like for a lot of the instruments where the samples are stereo, I collapsed the individual instruments to mono, and I used a lot of this Arturia plate, which sounds great for things like this. And you can also control the width of that that's in the plug, but since I'm collapsing the whole sample instrument, I did it at the track level. In a case like this, I was treating the instruments differently, so that's why it made sense to bring in the whole new instrument track and not just copy the MIDI in. What I did was, in the original session that included this end cue, I put everything into one track stack, and then when you go to the import function, it just makes it easy to see. You can go to your project that you want to import from, and it makes it easy to scroll down and find your folder stack that you want. Somewhat easy. So here it is. So here's the beginning of my stack that contains the cue, all the instruments in my cue. So I would just select all these guys and add, and it adds them together. Sometimes it puts them in the folder and sometimes not. It's kind of weird, so you have to re-folder them, but it should keep them in the stack if you bring the stack in, which is important because I have some processing on that stack. It's a little janky because if you're going to do splits, you're going to have to take the extra step of maybe having a folder within a folder of your different groups and everything. So I know it kind of breaks down that model of having stacks and using that to send off to create your stems. But in this case, I was doing the post mix, so I wasn't worried about creating stems because I could deliver it the way I wanted it, and if I needed to make a change, I could just go back to the session. So it worked fine. But that's how I took a front end cue, married it to the back end cue. So in this example, you can see there's the 15-second version, and this is a different 15 where the back end is longer. So I was able to go in and add some content and make that longer. Or here's the 6-second version that is very short, and almost like a tag. And some of them are as long as a minute, like this one is a minute long, the anthem version. That's what I did. So let's go, now I'll open up the Pro Tools session and we'll take a look at, once I had created all these different music versions, how I organized them in the Pro Tools session. So let's pull that up. The cool thing about Pro Tools, of course, is that you can load as many videos in there as there are 60 different pieces in here, and it's handling it. And I wish Logic could do that, but it's fine. So for the post mix part of things, it's great. For this one, I was getting OMFs from the editor. I would load the OMF in and then see which of their sound effects were working, which ones needed to be sweetened, or if there were some new elements that I needed to find or record or do some Foley and things. So here's my let's zoom out on this session. This is the whole session here with all the different pieces. The location function, obviously, to kind of get around within here. You would do this too if you were working on a film or something, where you can kind of use this as an organizational tool for your cues, and with the time code locations, it makes it super handy. Yeah, so then I just built this all up, spot by spot, and if I needed to borrow a sound effect from one, I could, like a lot of them shared some of the hits that happened on the different supers. So that was nice to be able to just kind of share those between what was going on. And yeah, there's really nothing else super exciting to show you in here other than just the organization of it. Oh, I know what I'll show you. There's one thing I've been using that's super handy. There's both Metric AB, which I've probably talked about before, and Streamliner, which is super handy. Like, this project is going to be online, and it's super handy to look on here and see what level you should be hitting, whether it's for YouTube, which is mainly what I was concerned about here. If it's going to give you a penalty and turn you down, or if it's going to turn you up. And from what I've read, from what's in this manual, it's better to have them turning you down a little bit than being too soft and having them turn you up. I don't know why. So I think that's all. I hope that was useful for someone. It was a fun project to work on, and yes, that's all. So thank you. Thanks for watching.